It's interesting because I'm actually like, I will take risks, but from like financially, I'm like very risk averse. I'm always thinking of all the things like what could go wrong. Let's think of all the things. Let's have a plan. So I just go into the very wide open eyes into the risk.
Welcome to Rep Matters, a podcast for sales professionals who are eager to build their business acumen and become top performers. In each episode, your hosts, Zoya Segelbacher and Caroline Jones, explore the real-life experiences, obstacles, and triumphs of salespeople. With an emphasis on authenticity and storytelling, listeners gain valuable insights into the strategies, mindsets, and skills that drive success in sales. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Rep Matters. This podcast is brought to you by Marketers in Demand. Marketers in Demand has in-depth videos, podcasts, and articles from some of B2B's most in-demand marketers. Today, our guest is Anne Pao. Anne Pao is the founder of Ignite Consulting, where she acts as fractional CRO for RevOps Executive, helping startup teams scale a unified go-to-market foundation. Anne helped build the go-to-market orgs at Tubular Labs, which has been acquired, Airship, Series F, Heap, Series D, Maven Clinic, Series E, Medallia, IPO, and Gilead Sciences, which is a Fortune 500 company, taking companies from 25 million to 100 million to 350 million to over $5 billion in revenue. As a buyer in over 500 deals, Anne brings a deep understanding to customer value and is also the founder of RevOps Village, a community of over 600 revenue professionals with a focus on RevOps, and is a board member of Women in Revenue. She advises several early stage startups and is a proud mom of 2 kids. Anne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Wow. What an introduction. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Zoya and Caroline.
Thank you. I was preparing for this week to talk to my husband. I'm like, I don't know that I know anyone who has done as many different things as Anne. And this is our first time meeting. So I'm really excited to dive into all of it. But I want to go way back because
Okay.
I've heard you say you wanted to work on satellites back during your college
space systems
days.
and satellites. You did do your research.
I mean, how does someone go from space to founding their own consulting firm?
Okay. Wow. That's a big trajectory. Maybe I'll tell you. So I wanted to work in space systems. I mean, some of it I learned. My family, many of them on my father's side worked in space systems, worked for Northrop Grumman, worked for aerospace. My aunt was the top ranked female at all of aerospace in the time that she was there. Fun fact. And so I think I was brought up around a lot of powerful engineers. And then I went to UCLA to study electrical engineering, and I wrote about wanting to work on satellites and space systems. But then I did not graduate with engineering. I weeded myself out because I felt like it was too limiting. They didn't want me to take things like biology of AIDS, biology of cancer, Spanish, anthropology. But I have a lot of diverse interests, as you probably saw. And so I quit after 2 years, studied economics, international development, minored in Spanish. But Caroline, I did end up working on space systems after all, because my first job was at Raytheon, where I was in the unmanned reconnaissance systems division as a finance lead. So life works very weird. I did end up achieving that dream just in a different way.
Would you go to space if you had the chance?
Oh gosh, would I go to space?
I love to know this answer from
that. I mean, you don't get to eat very good food there. I mean, did you see The Martian? Like, he had to like make potatoes with his own soup. Like, I don't know about that. I really like to eat, so I don't know. Maybe if they figure out the food situation, I would go.
Yeah, we'll stay on Earth for now.
Yeah.
Well, before, I know we've got some like career development, like more about your journey, because like you said, you have very diverse interests. I met you, for listeners who don't know, I met you at Medallia. One of my first interactions with you, like on a human level, was taking a yoga class with you at Medallia.
Classes. A few other SCRs. You were back when you were in SCR used to come.
Yeah. And I remember being so impressed with you. then now, but I just remember being like, wow, she's so strong. Because it kicked my butt. But yeah, so before we get into more of like the career development, kind of how you've gotten to where you are today, because I want to dive into all those companies from where I met you in your career at Medallia to before that to after on. I'd love to talk a little bit about some of your recent LinkedIn posts. I know you post a lot about motherhood. You post a lot about the kind of prospecting messages that you like to receive. We mentioned that you've been a buyer at over 500 like conversations and evaluations. I would love to start with how you like to be approached as a buyer before we get into the other side of things.
How I like to be approached as a buyer. Let me think. I mean, honestly, it's funny. So I know that you interviewed Jacob Karp on one of these recently, and I just met him for the first time about 2 weeks ago, which was quite fun. We were LinkedIn friends, and now we're real in life friends. And he really approached me in a way that felt authentic because I mean that is his vibe. But I think he tells the story like, and you were one of my targets when he was at people.ai. You were on my target list of people to tap into. And he didn't like come at me real hard. He just started, engaging with my post, commenting on things and offering like insightful questions. It was a little bit stalking, but like lightly. And then he started coming to RevOps Village, which I ran. And then he brought, I guess he was there because I was one of his target customers, but he also just brought such deep knowledge that I was like, who's this Jacob guy? And so then I actually reached out and I had him come on my RevOps Village. And so I think really what I think about that is number one, he wanted to get to know me in terms of like where I was spending my time, what I found important. And he allowed some space and time to do that without trying to like take out a withdrawal immediately. And by the time, I mean, now if he's like, Anne, can you introduce me to this person? I would immediately do it. I'd be like, of course, Jacob, how can I help you? But he was really making a lot of deposits, as you will. A lot of people talk about that. He made a lot of deposits, things that he might find interesting. I've seen other people do that as well. There's actually a woman who is a CEO of another company who, gosh, probably recently I'm going to be collaborating with her on an event, but probably for the first 5 months would just send me things she thought I'd be interested in. Like, Anne, you talk a lot about women in business. Here's an event I thought you might like to go to with no ask. And I found them really, really useful. So that's a great way to do it. Of course, it takes longer. I realize that, but I would rather you take a little bit longer than get blocked and deleted immediately, which I
Yeah.
do well.
Yeah, getting put in the naughty corner is really a problem for salespeople, especially when they're incentivized to do all the bad behavior that gets you there. So
Mhm.
I'm curious from what you've seen as a revenue leader in so many organizations, maybe even in your fractional work now, what are some ways that sales leaders can incentivize this type of like authentic deposit making behavior in salespeople?
How do you incentivize it? So I immediately go like with actual comp or I'll take a different route. I mean, right now we know everyone's like outbound is dead. I mean, it's not really dead. You just have to change your approach. Like spray and pray. I mean, is there a reason I've never bought Orem? Sorry, Orem, like power dialer. Like, no, like maybe it makes you more efficient, but it's like a disaster. I think you just have to be a lot more focused in who you're going after. And that probably means you're gonna have as many at bats, but which means each bat really, really matters. And so one way that we have incented that, and I'm in revenue operations, now CRO of revenue strategy, is literally incentivizing through a spiff. We had a spiff that was really centered around our target accounts and our target account penetration. And we did recipe card. How many accounts do we actually need in order to penetrate to get to an opportunity that we think is going to help us with respect to building the amount of pipe that's going to get to our bookings target? But we didn't have so many. We had a very defined amount. And then we said, okay, if you're able to break in here, we will pay you money. We'll like literally pay you for each account that you get in. And then if you're, that's the penetration, but that it wasn't done in isolation. We knew that we were then collaborating with our marketing friends and they were providing a lot of surround sound around it so that the seller felt really supported. And we had very, very strong success with this strategy. So I've run that play at a couple different companies and it's not like rocket science coming back to space systems. It's just like having a very focused list, keeping people focused on that list. And, I'm talking to Zoya, you ran sales development and you've done sales enablement and whatnot. And one thing that I found with sellers that I work with now being a CRO and also in doing revenue operations, when I go in is like sellers are just like ADD when I normally enter. There's so much coming at them. And really the first thing that we try and do is just eliminate a lot of the noise and really help them focus. And so I think that is one way where like something like a target list can be very, very impactful. And it's not just for getting a focus list that you're going to do your prospecting, that you're going to have time to do deeper personalization, that is expected, but it also helps the rep because they're like, okay, now we're all in line with like, these are the accounts I'm going after. So I think that's like a very critical strategy.
Before we
I'm
move
so
on
glad you
from
asked that
here,
question.
well, it's interesting because like we talk to plenty of people who've been ICs, are ICs, or are sales leaders, and they've only been in that track. But your
Mhm.
perspective, actually having the data and understanding, I mean, ideally every sales leader would understand the data that comes from RevOps, but having your like
That's why they
data
have
credit. Yeah, I'm hoping it's more unified if they work with Ignite Consulting. But your perspective, I think, is interesting on that because probably maybe 5 years ago, RevOps teams were looking at like, okay, if we just do more, then it drips down through the funnel to more
Mhm.
results. It's a little bit harder to measure this kind of more targeted approach, I would imagine, for many organizations.
Well, yeah, but it also, if you do it right, it really unifies the whole go to market and you get that flywheel effect. And it takes time, obviously. But I mean, I've been running these plays in 5 or 6 orgs. And yeah, it takes 3 to 4 months. But if you really start, I kind of like layer it in brick by brick. So first it's like, do we understand who we should be going after? Have we provided a list? Does marketing have the same list? Do they have the same list? Have we enabled the teams on how they're going to prospect? Have we given them the right tooling? Have we taught them how to write effective emails? I just, one of my teams, and actually was just talking to one of my sellers about it, and it was fantastic feedback to hear from her. She said, wow, that outbound sales training that we all ran last week, I didn't run it. My head of a namelet ran it. I just looked at the deck and was like, looks good. Was
Yeah.
so helpful because it was really, really tactical. But that's like, we can't just assume sellers have all of these skills. Some do, some this might be their first job. So how do we kind of create a lot of that structure? And then it's my job as the leader, whether as a revenue operations leader or as now a CRO, or as a manager of sales leaders, to hold everyone accountable and to really set the right cadence of accountability. And I think the cadence, again, is so critical. And so many organizations I go into, revenue orgs, really lack that. And so there is no accountability around performance. And that's usually one of the first things that we kind of look for.
I have a question that may be controversial, maybe not. If you ask LinkedIn, it's controversial, right? Because it's like always like a hard and fast, like calling is dead, SDRs are gone. But I'm curious because the way you described that motion, you didn't specify if it was SDRs or AEs, right? You said like you incentivize them to have the account penetration.
Yeah.
Are you seeing more AEs? AEs should always be self-sourcing, right? But like, I feel like for the last 10 years, that was also like a conversation that depending on where you were, right? It was very much like the predictable revenue model. What are you seeing with your orgs in terms of AE SDR pairing,
Yeah.
AE prospecting responsibilities?
Yeah. I mean, it'll obviously depend on the stage. So for my, seed stage clients that I have had, there's no SDR, BDR. It's like the seller, you do full cycle, like you're building the ship right then and there. And I've actually started to see more full cycle AE just given the state that we're in right now. There's not a lot of jobs. We're in, I think, still a recession, and everyone's looking at cash, and people are really trying to manage their churn. And if they're not managing their churn, well, the only way to mitigate churn, if you're thinking about net ARR, is driving top line growth. But then it's all about runway and cash. So that's where I'm seeing a full cycle AE becoming much more the thing. However, I have run spiffs around target accounts that incorporated the work that SDRs slash BDRs, or I've had groups where we called them sales associates. It's been so long, I can't remember, where we incented them. And really it was, like, what was the marker? So yeah, sometimes you're just building the motion. So I've been in ones where we just have to build the motion of building the pipe, and we'll pay the person who has the most stage 0 opportunities, for example, because we're just trying to build the muscle. The other ones are then like we would usually incent on those that were then converted into S1. So when the seller passed over and then they converted, then we would pay the SDR, and then maybe we would give them an extra one if it closed one, because that was an additional sign of quality. So I think you can really pay anybody who's doing the work. It just depends on the problem that you're trying to tackle. So I'll run spiffs usually when I enter an organization, not always, but often it's because consistent pipeline generation is a problem. So usually where I begin is around pipeline generation. That's usually the start of it.
You mentioned pattern recognition too, Anne, and so like the pipeline generation problem is something that you're deeply involved in when you first enter an organization. As a fractional executive, you get to run these plays several times with so many different orgs.
Mhm.
Are there any other down funnel patterns that you've been seeing in the past couple months or year running your business?
Tell me more because I should probably know what down funnel means, but I don't. So tell me what that means in my terms.
I claim to be so anti tech jargon, and yet here I am. I will explain myself. I mean, later
Everyone's gonna
on
be
in
like,
the
I'm
sales
hiring her as
funnel.
a CRO. She doesn't know what down funnel is.
I don't even know what I'm saying. So what I meant, and I'll be specific, thank you, is later on in the sales funnel. So after starting a new opportunity, maybe they are
Oh,
looking to receive pricing or you're going through
yeah.
negotiation.
Yeah, sure. So I've run a few. I mean, I've run a spiff to try and incent moving into mid-stage deals, and I've run these a couple times. Let me think, which story will we tell? I was at one organization where we saw a massive come back to that numbers personality we were discussing, a massive fall off in terms of win rate when we got to our stage three we were presenting was proposal and we were presenting pricing. And when we really uncovered it, and like why we were just like falling off a cliff with our win rate is because actually people weren't doing really good discovery. So they were just like, "Oh, you want to see some price? Here's our price. You want to buy?" Tank, right? And so it really uncovered, okay, we need to improve that. So we really incented about improving that stage three rate. I've run things where we're going to set a target, like how many, and from a mechanics perspective, this is getting rather tactical, but pull all the pipe that is in S1 at the start, and then we're going to pull what is in S3. And this is the amount that we want to see in S3. How do we get to that target? Understanding what our expected conversion rate is, that's going to get us to like really driving closed one. And that becomes a number that we hold and we talk about every single week. Now, sometimes you're off and sometimes you don't hit the number, but it's the importance is that you talk about the number. And I think that's actually sometimes, yes, you actually want to hit, yes. But sometimes in this cultural change, you actually have to be like, this number matters and everyone's going to look at it. And we're going to get on a revenue weekly and we're going to talk about it every single week. And we're to see where we're down, where we're up. And that changes mindset in terms of what people actually realize matter versus, oh, I can just keep all my deals in S1 and kind of hide. Mm-mm-mm-mm. So that's one that I've seen. On the other side, like much later in the journey, I've run expansion spiffs where, I remember I was in an organization and we had like a several $1 million expansion bookings target. And we started the year, they're like, yeah, I don't think we're gonna hit that bookings target. I'm like, yeah, what's our pipe look like? They're like, yeah, we don't really create pipe. We might win a couple deals and hopefully we hit it. And I'm like, well, we gotta build that muscle. And so I was like, well, let's start having your CS team create stage 0 expansion pipe. Like, well, why would we do that? These things just come in and win like out of the blue and we have no line of sight. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly why we're gonna do this. And so we started creating this pipe. And then we created a spiff around it. We're going to create whoever creates the most stage zeros or whoever gets the most close one off of these, we're going to pay them. And we blew that target out of the water. But we had to set the motion and we had to tell people this matters and we're going to track it every single week.
Yeah.
I love
And
that.
not change it 2 weeks later, because as you mentioned earlier, AEs have so many things coming at them. And I think one of the biggest detractors from them doing their jobs well is just too many changes.
Yeah, it's hard, right? I was talking about this with my team this week and even with my CEO. And, I go in, I'm a fractional executive. And generally, I always say people don't hire a fractional executive or even a head of RevOps when things are going well. I don't get hired when things are going really well. You don't hire a vice president of revenue operations and revenue strategy when everything we're expensive, right? You
Yeah.
don't hire a fractional CRO when things are great. And so usually like when I join an organization, there is like a very clear understanding of what needs to change and there needs to be swift action. And I'm like, okay, let's roll. I got some plays, we can roll it. But it's a lot of change. And I was having a conversation, I don't think she'll mind me saying this, with one of my sellers last week. And she said, Anne, I wasn't so sure about you when you came in. You were just like rolling out this change, like left and right. And, I just was like, we would share feedback and it was like, did that land? I don't know if she heard us. And then I started realizing, oh my God, she did hear us. She's been making these changes. Look at what's happening. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I did hear you. I just had to hear it a few times and gather my evidence and then put some things into play and stack some bricks. But I'm like, but I'm not surprised that like you probably didn't like me that much. It's all good. This is the usual thing where I go in and usually the first 2 or 3 months, people are like, where'd this woman come from? Wow, she's got a lot of energy. And then about month 4, they're like, I get it. I'll follow you anywhere. That has been said.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like I saw a post that was related to this. It was like related to taking the turn that you posted recently.
Yes, that was it. I was using this as an analogy, and I've said this, I even talked about it in a pavilion presentation, a couple weeks ago about, like, we need to prepare to take the turn. RevOps helps you take the turn, a lot of times you're, like, falling off the track, and taking the turn, you don't take the turn all at once. It's, like, really gradual, and it's a big turn, and so part of it, my job as a leader is, like, who wants to be in the car? Who's ready to be in the car? Who's ready for the journey? It's gonna be a really big turn at a point. You're gonna need to strap in. You might fall out of the car otherwise. But we're taking this turn. And so when like it's now become this metaphor in one of the organizations that I'm working for, we talk about the executive team, like, we're gonna take the turn. And I heard one of my sellers say it today, and I think we're taking the turn. I'm like, yes, we are.
Yeah, I
Too
think it's
good.
really important. Like I've been a salesperson who's like, all right, this new person's here. I don't see any change. And it's like, yeah, because their first day was Monday and it's Thursday of the same week. Like, buckle up, girl. Things take time.
Yeah.
So important.
And it's gonna be uncomfortable. I mean, it's, form, storm, norm, perform. We've seen that. I can't remember the guy's name. But I'm a believer in it. I've literally told teams, I've told it to every team that I've led. I pull it up, Tuckman, that's his name. Tuckman stages of like team development. And I said, we're gonna get in here and everyone's gonna be like, oh, Anne, she's so great for like 1 week. and then we're gonna hit a storm. We've just formed and everyone's like, oh, what do your kids do? And where do you go running? And then suddenly it's like storm. And kind of people are talking to one another. People are a little silent. They're talking to each other. And I say, we are going to storm and we're going to probably storm multiple times. And my ask is realize that the storm is a necessary thing we have to go through for us to norm. We cannot norm without the storm. And then we can't perform without the norm. So the more you get comfortable with like, this is going to get really uncomfortable. And there are going to be points that you're probably annoyed at me and I might be annoyed at you. But we have to like have some grit and some resilience to believe that we're going to get to the other side of it. And those are the teams that make it.
Absolutely. I'm sure a lot of that speaks back to your own leadership values. Of course, you show up with a lot of energy, but what are some other values that you bring as a leader or in your personal life? And if they're the same, I'm curious to hear that too.
Yeah, I love that question. I'm very much a value-centered leader, and I know my top 3 values. They're in my profile. My top 3 values are fairness, inclusion, and authenticity. And so many, many years ago, I did an exercise. I did Brene Brown's Courage Works, some like workshop that she did where you had 50 different values. And then you had to, everyone come up with their top 10 values, but can you come up with your top like live or die values? And the way that she had us do this was like, you really had to, over the course of a few weeks, like I whittled down to like 8. And I was like, I don't know which one are my top 3. And I had to really think like, where am I deeply triggered? Or where am I really energized? And pay attention to those moments and what's happening in those moments. And that really elucidated the value. So I found, and I say it's a personal and it's a professional value in that I don't hang out with people who violate those values. I don't spend time with them, maybe for a short period of time. I don't work in organizations who I feel like violate those values. They might have other great values. They might value innovation. They might value creativity, and that's amazing. But if you don't have at least one of those core 3 values at the top of like your stack, I'm not going to join your organization. There's just no way. Because I just know that it won't be a fit, right?
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. I love that. We're going through the time really quickly. I feel like I could talk to you all day.
No.
Going to, because I do want to touch on some of like the career development, things like that. I always think back to where we met Medallia. That was like an extremely significant job and company for me. Like I would say that really set my foundation for how I approached pipeline. I met very smart leaders who made themselves available to me at a time when I was like very junior and early in my career. And I'm curious to hear what some of those companies are for you, whether it was like
Mhm.
formative from when you were starting or if it's formative for the work that you're doing now. I'd love to hear, where you feel like you really learned and where you really were able to lead in.
Yeah. Oh, and what I remember you, by the way, in the back room, like PA 180, playing with like the Nerf guns, ringing bells, Ryan Doyle, you, all the other people have like all gone on to be leaders and entrepreneurs. It's so great. Gosh, let's see. I mean, I've been lucky to have very generally, not all, but generally very amazing experiences. The ones that really stand out that really kind of like changed the slope of my career, I would say. One was when I moved to Africa. So, for those who don't know, I worked for 5 years after I worked in finance, and I worked for 5 years in biotech at Gilead Sciences, first in finance and then in operations and analytics, supporting sales and marketing. Gilead Sciences is like the leading drug manufacturer of drugs for HIV, hepatitis, really unmet medical need, cardiovascular disease, etc. And I led HIV analytics at the time, and I was deeply passionate, loved my job, and was offered a promotion, like a 2 level up promotion, and I turned it down because I just had this deep desire to do something very different and out of my comfort zone, which for me, I'd written an essay to get into Wharton. I didn't get in, by the way. They didn't want me, but F you, Wharton. I went there anyways. Um, to do global operations in Africa. I licked my wounds from not getting in, and then I applied to do global operations in Africa with the Clinton Foundation. And I got 3 opportunities to go, one in Uganda, one in Swaziland, one on the global team. And I chose Swaziland because really interesting. This was back in 2011. I had been working at Gilead for about 5 years. We had been preparing to launch PrEP, treatment as prevention of HIV. Now it's a thing, FDA approved. At the time, data had just come out. They were going through FDA approval. And Swaziland was taking the data that formed the backbone of PrEP and was acting on it for a national implementation for the country to fight HIV. And this opportunity was to work on that campaign with the Ministry of Health. And so I was like, I gotta go. They were like, yeah, we want you to come. I'm like, great. So I sold all my stuff. Literally, I sold my car. I sold all my things. I packed up my car. I got the job, left 2 weeks later, got in a flight with 2 bags, went to Swaziland. And it really, at the time, I mean, the linear part of my career would have been associate manager to senior manager, continue at this Fortune 500 with a $48 billion market cap, make a lot of money, stay in San Francisco, blah, blah, blah. I probably would have been an executive director now, which is fine. I mean, many people it's a great company. It's a great company. But I knew that if I didn't go, I would never follow this dream. I just knew. And so I was like, I got to go and do it. And I thought I would move there for a year and then I would come back. And 6 months in, I was like, yeah, I'm definitely coming back. Remember, I came back. And then something happened. Like I was doing health policy implementation and health technology. So advising the Ministry of Health on their information management was like fantastic, really, really impactful work, hard work. And I started realizing, I don't think I'm done here. I kind of think I want to stick around. I also in that time fell in love with Africa, different parts of Africa, climbed Kilimanjaro, and then I met my now husband. And so really it changed my entire life, just this one bet. And what I found, like, if you look at my career, you might be like, wow, she's jumped around. And I have done a few jumps. You're right. And I was at Swaziland and kind of went into this totally foreign place. Everything was new world, working in nonprofit on the ground, implementing healthcare policy implementation, training up people for really deeply impactful work. Then I'm like, okay, now I'm going to quit, finish my contract. I'm going to move to Cape Town. I'm going to get my MBA and I'm going to like launch it, live social enterprise. Did that. Then I'm like, I think I want to go BI analytics. I'm going to go deep there. I feel like I've done business analytics, but I want to understand this BI thing. I feel like I need to get closer to tech. Did that. Then I'm like, I think I want to go into digital. And so I got to just experiment with all of these different new skill sets and opportunities. And what it really taught me is like, I can pretty much, maybe not space systems again in NASA engineering, I'd have to go back to that, but I can pretty much figure out how to do anything. And so I think it really enabled this real ability to bet on myself. And, I then coming to Medallia, that's the other one. It was also very shaping for me because may or may not know this, Zoya, but Medallia was the first SaaS company I ever worked for. I didn't even know what SaaS meant when I applied. I had no business applying for that job. But I
I
applied.
had no idea.
I know, right? Right. And I was in Africa. I had been advising as part of being the head of data for an agency, a digital agency. I'd been advising this company on their customer first strategy and kind of putting the customer at the heart of all of their feedback. And I was working with this very, very large, fast growing bank in Africa, talking directly with their head of marketing. And then I was recommending a system that I did not know was basically Medallia. And then when I thought about moving back, it came across my radar. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm advising all my clients to do this. I should join this company. And I applied there, got the job. I mean, I still remember Alan Kobayashi saying, Anne, you're the wild card candidate here. We have like 200 people that are applying for this job at blah, blah, blah. And you don't even know what SaaS is. And like, why should we hire you? Why should we bet on you? And I still remember I said, well, you're right. I don't know what SaaS is. I can't tell you what ACV is, annual contract value. but I'm like, but you know what I do know how to do? I'm like, I have stepped into multiple scenarios where I didn't know up from down, and I've been wildly successful in those. So I'm pretty sure I can figure out SaaS. And I got the job. And that was this like journey of SaaS, and also people like Ashwin Bilal, who tapped me when I was director of sales ops and analytics and said, I want you to come build out the BI function. And I still think about that moment, like really saw something in me and was like, come over here, and was like such a sponsor of my career that really just set me back on a track. So
such a good answer. I also remember my interview with Alan. He asks the questions.
He asks, great. He's going to say the thing.
And I can't believe how quickly you said climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and then just moved on to the rest. It was like in one breath. And I was like, wait.
At the top. But then I just had to sit at Stella Point and breathe for about 45 minutes, freezing. And then I was fine.
Totally fine. Doing hard things. This might be Jacob Karp level stalking, but I saw you write something about your move, that first move with the Clinton Foundation, where you said something like, I had no entrepreneurial hopes until I moved to Africa. Do you remember writing that? And can you unpack that for us? If so,
I don't remember writing that post specifically, but I have said that before, and it's absolutely true. None. Yeah, but finish. I feel like you were going to ask me something. I want to hear what you have to say.
I'm curious how that experience unveiled entrepreneurship as a path for you.
Yeah. I mean, well, I told you I did launch an enterprise there. Launched it, had people in, closed it, burnt out. But I think what really struck me was just there was so much untapped opportunity. So this was back in 2011. I mean, I was like in Swaziland. And beautiful country, landlocked, surrounded by South Africa, Lesotho, Mozambique, etc. But I remember it was a big deal if we could get like a latte. Like, oh my God, they have lattes. Because it was just, here you go, or you would go to the grocery store and there would be like 5 types of salad dressing. And I remember when I came back to the US, I'm like, there's a whole aisle dedicated. And so that is symbolic, I think, of just the different states of maturity of commercialization in markets. And so while I was there, I decided I wanted to get my MBA, and it was really around because I wanted to do social innovation and social entrepreneurship, which I did try to do. I don't think I did it very successfully, but I did it. And I just was witnessing so much unmet need in terms of market to need and to demand. And it was just everywhere. And in the US, it's just so crowded, right? The other thing that I was also witnessing is South Africa. I don't know what it's like now, but at the time, nationally, the unemployment rate was like 25 or 26%. And then when you got into individuals who didn't have, I don't even say a college degree, a high school degree, it was even worse. And so as a result of that, there are just a lot of that has to do to the education of the country and apartheid and the roots of that. But really, as a result, it created this resilience and this entrepreneurial grit in so many people that were like, I don't fit into this box of systems that are taking me into a path of traditional work. So I'm going to have to create my own path. So I know so many entrepreneurs in South Africa, and it's really just born out of what the reality is there, which is apparent.
We are coming up on time too. So I'll be quick. I'll ask the last question and then we'll move to, we have like final questions that we like to ask everyone. Okay. So the question that I wanted to ask, I think it's related. We're talking about entrepreneurship. Something that I have always really respected about you, Anne, is that you're a very like data centric, analytical person. And I just did a DISC assessment. No big deal. I'm like by no means an expert. I'm so curious what your DISC is because you're extremely well-rounded. But like an observation that I've made is when people are very analytical, sometimes they're risk averse. Not always. But I feel like your superpower is that you clearly are very analytical. And then in terms of your choices and your approach to life, really, you've taken risk, a lot more risk than like the average person. How do you balance those two qualities?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that you brought in DISC. So I did Discovery Insights, which they're like kind of like this. They're slightly different. And so I actually did a whole course in my MBA, 9 beautiful weeks, all about this. It was a really long time. And so my colors, my primary color is red. No, I lied. My primary color, sorry, is yellow and then very closely behind red. So yellow is all around. I love getting people together. Love initiating things, activating change, bringing teams together. Like I get so much energy out of that. Very yellow. That's like happy place yellow. But I'm just a sliver more yellow than I am red. And red is like directive, take charge. Like I was at my kid's baseball game the other day. The dad's is like, Anne, you're just like a leader. I'm like, yeah, I know. It just finds me. Like, I don't like, the people are like, you're going to lead. I don't even volunteer for this. Just suddenly like it just happens, right? That's the red. And it really goes with, command and probably like directness and sometimes bluntness. And sometimes I can be a little bit tough, right? But the smaller sides, so I'm equal parts, almost red, yellow on the axis. And then I'm probably 75% of the square are blue and green. And they're also about equal in size, but there may be, 75% of the other side. And the blue is interestingly analytical and the green is more like harmony. What's fascinating though, is that my exact opposite of like my color, which is really like a blend of orange leaning towards like red, yellow, the exact opposite is blue, which I was like, but I'm analytical. I'm so numbers driven. But actually, even though I have that as a skill, my personality trait is the opposite. And so I bring this up because this is a little bit outside of what you asked, but I'll share it because it's a fun story. You can decide if you want to delete it later. One of my MBA,
We will not delete it.
One of my MBA cohorts, Warren Wazi, if you're watching this, I'll send it to you. He is like cool blue. And when we plotted us all on this grid, he and I were the complete opposite. Oh, we used to rage. We would rage. Him and I, the first, we could not stand each other. He's now a very good friend. He came to my wedding, but because we were just so different. And he was like, Anne, why are you so emotional and charged? And I'm like, why are you so cold? Why are you so analytical? He's this auditor. And so, but what I found is when I'm not my worst, but when I'm most triggered, I become very blue. So actually, when I'm really upset, I'll get really quiet and really silent. And then, as my husband said, he's like, oh God, it's bad. So, I don't know. You asked me a question. I went on a big round, but that's the discovery piece. Tell me the last piece of your question. Sorry, Zoya.
Yeah, no, I love that answer so much. And it's fun to see, I love that you shared that example with someone who was at your wedding, because it's so fun to see the communication styles, right? When they come head to head, sometimes you're totally on the same page, but it's just the style is different. The second part of my question was just how you balance that. It's not you covered it actually a lot in your answer, but just if you have a way when you feel one creeping up, or you mentioned, when you're triggered, how you manage taking risks along with knowing, your profiles or your tendencies.
Right. It's interesting because I'm actually I will take risks. But from financially, I'm very risk averse. I'm always thinking of all the things, what could go wrong? Let's think of all the things. Let's have a plan. So I just go in with very wide open eyes into the risk. I'm rarely surprised by risk is what I would say. I go and be oh yeah, there's this risk. And I'm going straight into it. So it's a very conscious choice. I think with respect to the balancing, what I really have to watch out for, I don't know if that's the right word, but whatever, we're going to say it, is my happy place where I most like to be, where I'm most authentic and is really yellow first, right? But I can very easily go into red. And in the work environment that we live in, and I have always worked in tech, which as we know is pretty male dominated. I'm a CRO and there's only 12% females. So like being red is like, that's like what it is. But realizing that while I have that, I don't have to take that angle. And so sometimes I have to allow some space and actually it's very easy when I go into like execution mode and like, what are we going to get done? I can just go red. And I know that's going to serve me. But what I actually have to really slow myself down to do is to bring more of that yellow to the table and to expose it and let people see. Because again, what we were saying earlier, there's like this aha moment people find, and this happened in MBA, 80 people in my class, 9 were women, a lot of men. This happened in work where they're like, oh, she's actually a nice person. I'm like, I am really nice. But like maybe I just let a little too red. So I think like one thing is try to let more of that yellow, which is where I want to be, creep out earlier and don't feel like I have to get boxed into the survival state that we may just naturally go into.
Yeah. God, can you come back and talk about this more with us, Anne? Because this is such a vulnerability related conversation, I think, or authenticity related, because I think there's a fallacy where we think, oh, I have to be myself, which is only one way. But especially women, when we are authentically ourselves, we're acknowledging our comfort level and able to play up other parts. Like we contain multitudes. Yeah. I'm sorry for whoever I just plagiarized with that. Obviously not my original statement, but when we are allowed to be many things, then we can actually be ourselves. But a lot of times we can't be.
It is. And I got feedback once that was not just once. What am I kidding? I've gotten this feedback many times in my career. Anne, you can be, pretty outspoken and like really strong. Anne, why are you striving so much? Anne, like maybe you should speak a little quieter, maybe be a little softer. Maybe don't like study engineering. You're so social. Real things have been said to me throughout my career. And it's not just from men. I've gotten it from women. Well, and that tone was a little bit scolding when I just have said things like, I'm disappointed we're here, team. But then I hear men or women, but usually men say things with much more gravitas, and that's accepted. And I've literally said, I think you're making a pretty gendered observation of how I'm engaging right now. I'm just being assertive and direct. And I'm allowed to be direct and assertive. That's my job. I'm like, I'm an accountable leader. It's my job to hold you accountable.
5 years from now, we see your name in headlines for following your passion and doing something big. What's the headline?
Gosh.
No, Zoya, have I told you recently how awesome this question is? Like, it's just so good.
Yeah.
Zoya's idea, and it's been really interesting.
It's headline making. Okay, because this is something that's like out there at some point. I will have written a book that is all about working 20 plus years in male dominated environments across the globe and finding my own path and telling all the things and it becoming a wild bestseller on every list. And then I'm being interviewed across the board. And this book is based off of work that I did on the podcast. I can't name the name yet, but I thought about it, which is going to be about the raw, uncut things that happen in leadership for women. So that's probably going to be it.
Yes.
Probably.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I love that question. What I love too is that everyone always takes a moment to think about it. Like sometimes I say, like, I was going to interject and be like, take your time. I'm like, Anne's taking her time. Well, our final question is, what are you promoting? Where can people find you? We just like to wrap with like details on any of the plugs and connections.
Thank you. Well, find me Anne Pao on LinkedIn. There aren't really any other Anne Paos. Look there. You can join RevOps Village. It's just a Go group. I accept everybody as long as you don't spam sell me and then you get disinvited. So join RevOps Village, revenue professionals. If you're a woman listening to this and you're a woman in revenue or you're thinking about becoming a woman in revenue, join our organization. I'm on the board and we have an event on June 5th. This will probably launch after that, but you could come to it or you could come to one of our next events. We might do one in New York and probably Austin later in the year.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Anne. This has been so fun.
Thank
I
you,
loved
Zoya. Thank you, Caroline. It has been fun. What a joy.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Rep Matters, the podcast for sales professionals who become top performers. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow Rep Matters wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or access all episodes at marketersindemand.com/repmatters. See you next time.